Hello, Internet. This is Alicia Sterling from Geeks Without Bounds again. Today we are here with a mentorship with uh, ServiceAdvisor, and we're going to be speaking with Robin Mays. Robin is going to tell you a little bit about herself, but she has about 20 years experience in disaster response in lots of different contexts, and she has experience working with government and non-governmental agencies, and I'm hoping that she can help the ServiceAdvisor team figure out how to negotiate a deal with the next group that they're going to do a deployment for on exactly how they're going to handle co-design, and so that everybody knows in advance how feedback is going to get back to the development team and how the development team is going to be able to find out what's actually happening with their software. So let's start out. Robin, could you introduce yourself a little bit better than I did?
Sure. Hi, Darius and Renee. I've been doing what I call rapid response operations for about 20 years. I was in the military for a little while, and then I did, since 2000, I've been doing humanitarian disaster response, first for the UN World Food Program, then for USAID's lead agency for disaster response overseas, and then for World Vision. And now I'm back at school writing about those things. But I love the opportunity to help link research academia and other young people doing innovative things to how things work on the ground to help them to be more effective. So I look forward to our time today.
Great, thanks. So I was going to ask Renee next to introduce yourself and also talk a little bit about the ServiceAdvisor project.
Sure. I'm the founder of Peace Geeks. We've been at this now for about 3.5 years, and we have been focused. So Peace Geeks was created primarily to support grassroots organizations in post-conflict and developing areas to get access to communications tools to help them better do their work. And we also, although this isn't a civil society project directly, we also do humanitarian projects. And this came about through the Digital Humanitarians Network, and we ended up working with a local private sector company to build this app. And we've ended up having discussions subsequently with the person at UNHCR who originally conceived of this idea, and we were talking about potentially deploying this as a second use case in Lebanon, which also is housing about 1 million refugees. And more broadly, we're just trying to figure out how to take this app that we've developed for Syrian refugees in Jordan to the next level, so that it's basically easy to deploy for any mission that wants to use it, and that it basically expands on the existing capabilities in a way that's going to be meaningful and useful to the people who would use it. And that one of the mechanisms, or one of the sort of main ideas for how to advance this app eventually is going to be around collecting feedback from refugees. And so that's a little bit about me, a little bit about Peace Geeks, and a little bit about the project and where we're going with it.
Great, thanks. And Darius, could you introduce yourself as well, please?
Hi, yeah, so I'm the fundraising coordinator for Peace Geeks, and been working with Peace Geeks for about 8 months now. And yeah, so I kind of the one that's trying to lead the ServiceAdvisor app moving forward and trying to find funding for it. And yeah, that's the basics.
So Renee, I'd just like to open this up to you. You can ask questions and dive in. And of course, Renee and Darius, if at any point you feel like you want to, check in and figure out where something is going, don't hesitate to do so, okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Alicia, I think it would be helpful from my perspective to have a bit more of an idea of how you think that Robin can best be of assistance to us before I sort of dive in with questions, because I understand the experience. I just want to make sure that I'm bridging what you see as what she can bring to the table with where we're trying to go. So if you maybe can just add a little bit of that, that would be helpful.
Okay, well, actually, I did the R switch again. I'm sorry. I meant to say, Robin, jump in and ask questions. I clearly need more caffeine. I think that I think that Robin actually has a lot of experience to give in terms of the relationship building and managing projects with both government and non-governmental agencies, and dealing with UN partners. And she also has this PhD that she's done around co-design issues in disaster response. So I suspect that she has lots of good stuff in her head that we just have to pull out and apply. So Robin, sorry about messing up you guys' names, but if you could jump in.
Okay, sure. That's funny. I have a sister named Renee, and we have all R's in my family, so I actually get called Renee quite a lot. But Renee and Darius, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes, I'm just on mute because it's quite rainy where I am, and I just didn't want it to distract. So yeah.
Okay. So basically, what Alicia shared with me, it sounds like you guys kicked off a project and you had a key informant in UNHCR to help you design a software that is helping people on the ground in refugee camps to access resources, in particular food. Is that right?
Sorry, it was so the the idea behind the app is that there are so many services that are provided to refugees when they are displaced in where in whatever situation they're in, whether it's an IDP or refugee, and when you are displaced, you don't necessarily know where to find those services, and there's no one single place where to go and find information about what services are available to you and where those offices are located. You have to go to each of the websites of the organizations and so on, and that's very time consuming. And so the idea behind the app was to basically have one single resource where all of the office locations, in this case it's for about 540 different service locations around the country, can be plotted so that anybody, whether it's a refugee or whether it's another humanitarian organization that's trying to refer a refugee, can be able to find the information that they need.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I thought that I had shown you the site when we had that last meeting. I apologize. I just, dropped the URL in the chat window on the right-hand side.
Okay, great. So, so basically, it's accessible via the web.
Yes, it's a web app basically. So it can be accessed on a mobile phone using a web browser or on a computer using a web browser.
Okay, so this is primarily for use in countries that have ubiquitous like smartphone use or computer use, not necessarily impoverished nations.
That's true. Although again, there's sort of two audiences for this. One is the refugees themselves, and then the second is the organizations that are operating, because all of them actively are involved in updating this app. So I mean, a lot of this has to do with the fact that refugees sometimes who might not have any phone at all come to them and need a service that they cannot provide, and the organizations themselves don't know where to refer them to. So this is also a mechanism for helping the organizations to direct them to the organization.
So when you say organizations themselves,
Yes, I mean like CARE and
Okay.
MedAir and those the humanitarian organizations that are operating on the ground within the context of a refugee situation.
and they've told you they don't have a place to access information, like CARE and MedAir type folks?
That's my understanding from the UNHCR folks, is that they are doing this partly so that they can do referrals to other service providers on the ground. That's what I've heard from
So
UNHCR.
UNHCR can do referrals, can send people in need to those agencies. That's what you're saying?
No, it would be, for example, like say somebody is going in to deal with like somebody's going into care, but they also need help with shelter issue, and they need to know who are the other organizations that are operating in the region that work on shelter issues. So it's basically a way for them to be able to do a lookup of the other service providers, and know whether or not they need to make a referral, because some organizations require a referral, some others don't. So there's one place where they can find out what's nearby that's within this thematic area, and does it require a referral.
So I have a number of questions, but I guess I'll preface them with, well, let me actually start the question. Have you guys been able to be on the ground for a disaster response?
No, we have not, and that's been something that that we recognize. Like this came to us through UNHCR, which is on the ground. So, we're getting this through obviously people who are very experienced with this. We have been trying to figure out if it makes sense for us to go and be there for one of the activations, and we're open to that. The challenges are around both funding to get us there, and just security issues, which we don't necessarily have an ability to, because we don't have much experience with this, we don't know necessarily what we'd be stepping into.
Okay. Well, I'm hesitant to say too much because I don't know what UNHCR gave to you as their requirements. But my understanding going forward is that you want to make this less UNHCR specific and more something that can be done regardless of the agency asking about it. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Okay, so let me speak to that since I don't know specifically what UNHCR was asking you for. And the context I want to provide is that what you're asking for is really complicated. It's not quite like, so who is on the ground at the time and operating is very dynamic. What services they're providing from any moment is very dynamic because the needs are very dynamic and the funding is very dynamic. So kind of a one-stop shop that has all the perfect information is a little bit of a pipe dream. So I would say what I would aim for if I was you is there's two things you can do. There's the easy part, which is the main agencies that have been operating in that area for a long time. So as a disaster worker, we each have networks, and we know these things, and we primarily get that information through our trusted networks. So if I see a hurricane heading towards the Maldives or somewhere in Southeast Asia, I'm going to immediately tap into my network of folks who work in that region, find out who specifically is on the ground at that time, maybe call care, call all of that. Because the people, the places, the numbers, the depending on where the storm lands or the disaster hits is all very dynamic. So you could get some sort of information up there that is stationary, like the desk, like if you go to each homepage of Care USA or Care UK or World Vision or UNHCR, they're going to have regional offices that have sometimes a desk officer per that works each country or each region, and you could provide some sort of stable information from that perspective.
So
now, go ahead.
Can I just jump in for 1 second?
Sure.
So first of all, the specific case, I'm not sure how much I'm addressing this, but to the humanitarian organizations that are operating on the ground. First of all, when I say it's a one-stop shop, it's a one-stop shop very specifically for a specific context. So in this case, it's Syrian refugees living in Jordan. Second of all, this app is actually updated by those organizations as their situation changes. So as their offices close and as their thematic priorities shift. So we certainly recognize that that's a reality, and that having a one-stop for everything doesn't make sense. This is very contextual, and it is updated on a regular basis by the organizations and coordinated through UNHCR.
I see. So each agency is responsible for its own data.
That's right.
Okay. That's smart. Okay, so that makes sense. Then, other than that, the other question I just have is in terms of, well, we talked about whether, like you said, this is for Syrian refugees on the ground, assuming they have smartphones.
Yes.
And ways to charge their batteries.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing would be the organizations that are working together, which generally already have a network, but you're trying to provide a application for those agencies to use to connect each other.
That's right.
Okay, which would be really helpful as turnover happens and such. So what is inhibiting you from using it now then?
Oh no, it is in place. It has been deployed to Jordan. It's been live since August. Mm-hmm. It's regularly updated. It's now exists in English and Arabic, and so no, it is in place right now. There's sort of two kind of next stages that we're looking at. One is where is another context where we might be able to deploy it to, and the challenge is that we need to really make sure that we're doing this through a coordinating body. We can't just kind of go on our own and do this, because obviously without that sort of coordination and buy-in from the coordinating bodies, we're not going to make, as you say, it's not going to be a useful tool.
And so who's using it? I have the NGOs and the 500 agencies or whatever. Are they actually updating their info, or are they using it?
Yeah, so it's 60 organizations with locations in 540-odd places around the country. And they are regularly updating it. I mean, every time I go to the map, I can see that there's new records or there's different numbers in different places. So it is being updated. I don't have a sense for how often it's being updated, but I do know that it is being updated. We're trying to get UNHCR unfortunately did not put analytics on the app, so unfortunately we don't actually have a sense right now for how much it's getting used, how often it's getting accessed, and so I'm going to follow up with them again this week about just making sure that they put that on there.
So hold on, I'd like to clarify something. So the agencies are updating this data, but they're updating it in UNHCR database, right?
They're
Uh,
using a database called Activity Info.
right.
It is
So
another tool.
they may or may not even be aware that their data is coming up in ServiceAdvisor. Like for
No,
all we know, they don't know that ServiceAdvisor exists,
no,
right?
no, no. We do know they were very actively consulted in this process.
Okay.
And because I mean, I think that there was some skepticism at the beginning as to how useful this would be, and they very much recognized that it was only going to be so useful as the data that was in it. And so there was, once they started to see it kind of live, they kind of became very motivated to kind of update it. So I don't know how.
When you say they, who do you mean?
I mean, UNHCR, as a coordinating body, had meetings with CARE, with MedAir, with these other organizations on the ground to talk to them about the potential for this app. And and so as a so there needed to be a certain amount of buy-in from those organizations.
And so what information it comes up on the app? Is it a phone number and a location?
There's two views. There's a map view and there's a list view. And so the map view basically will show you on the map, the different places, the different, the numbers by sort of area, and then you can zoom in on specific areas and see where they're at. Or you can do a filter by on a list. Either way, you can get a record for each service location. So each of the 540 odd service locations that basically says what organization is it, what thematic area do they operate in, what government are they in, and, if you have a mobile phone and you can geolocate your sort of current location, then what's within 5 miles, 10 miles, or whatever the distances are, doesn't require a referral, and so on. So you can filter by a number of criteria, and then once you have, what that then produces is a list of organizations that meet your criteria, and there's both a preview and a detailed view of what that organization's services are. So it says, these are the office hours, these are the services provided, this is where it is, and this is if you require the referral or not, and so on. So it just provides a number of pieces of data on the specific service.
Okay. All right. So and now.
I don't know if you've been watching your screen, but I've been screen sharing the app to.
Yeah, no, that's been very helpful. Thanks. Cool. I'm looking at it too, just to kind of.
So if you click on the search in the top left.
Yep.
It should. What it's supposed to do, although I'm seeing it's not doing it for me right now.
Yeah, well, it won't let me. Oh, it's just thinking. It's working for me.
Okay.
Just slowly. Which is probably just because I'm in the middle of Illinois with slow internet.
I think it's probably partly because it's waiting for. That's really weird. Okay, yeah. So it doesn't seem to do it until all the data is loaded. So so if you click on search, then if you kind of go down, it'll show you the category of service.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go into advanced search,
mm-hmm.
you can see there that you can also filter on the organization, on the proximity, and then on the region.
So, okay, it drops the activity if I pick the org. Or does it? No.
Well, it's still there. It's just above.
So it okay. Yeah, this is cool. So in terms of going forward, then you're like, how do we plug in order to build this in other places?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you raise an important point, which is that that we kind of go and talk with. And I mean, I think you also raise an important point that we're not on the ground and we don't necessarily have the experience. But then again, that's not necessarily our role. I mean, again, we don't specifically have a problem with going there, but we'd have to do it at the end.
But when you're designing, a couple of the issues, well, I see a number of things that you may want to think of if you really want this to be used.
Yeah.
And the one that is just such a double-edged sword is security. And this is a war zone, and so organizations releasing their locations and the services they're providing can be a bit dangerous.
Jordan is not
through an open internet.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan's not a war zone, so it's I think that's less of a problem in that case. But I certainly take the point.
Right, it's less right. So sure. Then the second issue would be in terms of what would make the organizations want to keep this updated, because it's only as good as is updated, right? And that would be, I would presume, in terms of the people they're serving actually having access to it. So I do think the population use of internet and cell phones is going to be important to them. And then the third thing sort of coming to mind for me is, yes, if you want to see the beneficiaries, the folks receiving the services, use this, you would need to be on the ground to do interviews and understand not just, would an internet-based app be helpful, but understand how they trust information. A lot of people have created internet resources, but because it's not something they're familiar with or they trust, like in the Horn of Africa, they're very suspicious of the internet. They believe that it's like Satan and things like that, and so often it's just the children of those folks who might use it, or and it's also not quite ubiquitous, but there's different issues depending on the culture on how they might use it or not use it. And then finally, the relationship part is really important, as we've kind of talked about, and that is not just in terms of you having a good relationship with the people in order to get the information, but the relationship of the people being served in relation to those agencies, and how they know them, whether they know them, and how would they go about to get that information normally, and would it be So I like that you said, so if UNHCR is collecting, if they're doing it through a UNHCR portal, I presume that UNHCR is letting them know that this is going out on the internet and sharing it with them. That's really important. They're not, when you're an emergency worker on the ground, from the perspective of the practitioner, you are swamped with information requests, and you're
Yeah.
swamped with people telling you they have the next best thing that's going to help you to do your job. And so, you know, I'm not going to listen to that unless I'm the person, you know, positioned to screen all of those, you know, hundreds of things that come through.
Right.
Unless it comes from my trusted folks who are doing that screening, or a friend who used it and found it useful, or, you know, a fellow colleague, these kinds of things. So I think you're on the right track with the relationship. So UNHCR is a great place to be situated because they are often a coordinating agency during disasters. Another one is OCHA.
Yes.
Um,
We are connected into OCHA because the founders of the Digital Humanitarians Network works at OCHA. And so one of the pieces that we're actually trying to do right now is get a one-pager together that we would then send out to, you know, OCHA, UNHCR, you know, UNICEF maybe, if that might be relevant in some cases, and so on, and just kind of pass it along to the relevant coordinating bodies.
Cool.
And then share it. So I think one of the things that we're trying to do is put that one pager together, and we've gotten some feedback from GWAB, and I think it would be really, really helpful for us once we have a draft of it ready to show it to you and get your input on what information is working, what would be missing, and that would help to kind of get it through to people.
Okay. And then the other place that really is the lead in anything going on is the government. So UN, NGOs, we are supposedly, even, you know, other nations coming in to assist the government in their authority and their responsibility. And from an NGO's perspective, that's really important to navigate that autonomy respectfully. And so ultimately, the goal of NGOs in particular is to move capacity to the host nation, to the host to the people in the nation and their governing agencies. It's tricky, obviously, because sometimes the government, it can be persecuting the people, and you have to be careful on how you navigate that. But ultimately, I would say, if you're, you know, you want this to, the host nation will also actually be the lead. OCHA is helping to coordinate for them and helping to coordinate the international community that knows each other and comes in and out for every disaster. But the host nation would ultimately want you know, their name on this as well. Like, so what are the government agencies within, you know, country X, the Ministry of Health, who is, you know, leading, and what are, you know, they have approved for each UN agency, each foreign nation that's providing aid, and each NGO to be present in that nation. And so that's another center of connection that also you know, by principle, we're trying to not usurp their authority in any way. So
yeah, that's interesting.
So that would be another place that you can think of if you want to get inroads into, you know, who's on the ground. And
I see. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's helpful to know.
I mean, OCHA is working usually very closely hand in hand with the government and their lead person for the humanitarian response. So they are often, you know, right in the middle of that, UNHCR or OCHA, depending on the type of disaster.
Okay. Yeah. That's.
And another thing I would just caution you is in that you're building an app for the UN, to recognize also that UN is a facilitator, and so there's not just issues with authority with the government, but there's also issues of autonomy and authority with communities and with NGOs and all the folks who are cooperating to bring aid. And so anything with information that is that you're doing with information for the UN, you have to remember that other agencies own that information. And I love that you're saying they're the ones updating. I would just make sure that when they're updating that UNHCR portal, they do know that that this is something that's going to be shared wider, and they've given permission, and they've agreed to that, and they know what they're agreeing to. So, because and for the other than autonomy issues, there's the security issue for that. So, for example, there's a story we often tell of an NGO that was operating in the tsunami earthquake. They were able to, they were being offered vaccinations, medicine from the U.S. military for persons in Indonesia. They chose to refuse that donation because accepting goods from the U.S. military would put in danger their offices and personnel operating in Iraq at the time. If it was known, if it could be suggested that this NGO was working with the U.S. military in Indonesia. So they have to make decisions about that all the time, and how they release their information, and what donations they accept, and how they're describing themselves. So just, I mean, not that this is, you know, it's really part of the UN's job. You know, people agree to work with the UN, and the UN understands these principles. Usually, folks in the UN have come up through, you know, the humanitarian world. They've worked in it. They lived in it. They know that these are important issues. But I just thought I'd bring that to your attention, because when you get into information, you can really get into it doesn't look like you're using any beneficiary information, which is even a bigger issue, but even just to use agencies' names and how they present it can be touchy, have consequences.
Yeah. No, I mean, with beneficiary information, I mean, I don't think that we're going to be getting into that anytime soon. What we might get into, which is kind of phase 2 of the app, is collecting feedback, anonymous feedback on the provision of services, towards helping the individual organizations and UNHCR and the coordinating bodies kind of more broadly to help do a better job at delivering those services to people. What exactly that looks like in terms of what kind of surveys would be created is very unclear right now. That would definitely need to be driven by UNHCR. I mean, otherwise we're just guessing what information is useful to them.
Well, and I'd be careful of getting in the business of assessing NGOs' work via the UNHCR, because that's not their job. And how you decide to assess, or what surveys you take to say, are they getting good? Like, if the UN wants to do that for the UN, that's great. But
no, I think that you're misunderstanding. The surveys aren't about what the service providers are giving. It's about what we're trying to figure out is how do we get feedback about who is using ServiceAdvisor, how they're using it, and if ServiceAdvisor is helpful.
No. That there's two separate things that are going on. So one is that first of all, with respect to the current situation, Edouard, who is our contact at UNHCR, is organizing a panel to get feedback, initially primarily from the organizations, the service organizations, on the user experience of the app. That's number one. That's what Lisha is talking about. Phase 2 of the app, according to UNHCR's interest, is around collecting data from refugees and service providers around how to improve the quality of service delivery to refugees. So I'm hearing Robin say that there is a concern around, what role, what is an appropriate role for UNHCR to be playing in terms of doing that data collection. And I think that that's a very interesting and good point that I would want to bring up in my conversations with Edouard.
And also there's a huge body of science and world and experts and study and practice around monitoring and evaluation, which is essentially what you're talking about, and how services are provided. And it's quite contentious what data you collect and how you collect it as to who it benefits and what story it tells. And so it is debated from just one proposal. If I'm an NGO and I have USAID funding, and how I report my monitoring and evaluation so that it shows, evidence-based results as to my effectiveness with this program, that alone, just one program, and how you do that on one, is quite contentious. And, in general, a lot of the research I do says that it's quite contextual and specific. So kind of having something that is the silver bullet that says, oh, if you collect this data, you can tell if somebody's doing their job right or not, is sort of a myth. And to create something that does that and sort of gives energy to that, it might not actually be doing what you intended it to do, or what UNHCR intended to do, which is to improve programming for beneficiaries.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things that I recognize in that. One is that I think in general, if you're going to be asking people for input, I think that you yourself a disservice by having no actual follow-up mechanism, because first of all, you may lose the trust of the people who are actually providing that input, because they may have no idea if this goes anywhere or does anything, which means that they probably won't do it ongoing. So I think that there's a whole user experience piece, and then there's, like I said, I appreciate the broader question about this, because having just gone through the process of developing our own M&E framework, we understand how complicated that is, and how contextual that is. My guess is that UNHCR is looking at this from a broader coordination perspective rather than from a we're going to evaluate these organizations perspective. But I think a whole lot more clarity around what the intent is and how data collected will benefit that sort of case is needed.
Yeah, and also the permissions, and that, because they could have the perfect intent, and then someone else could use it for a different intent when they create it, and someone else could use it for a different intent, and it's very easy. And there is a large push by governments to control, what is happening from the top, and our research shows, and a lot of other people's research shows, that autonomy needs to remain at the bottom, an agency needs to remain at the bottom to honor human rights and to have beneficiaries receiving the services that matter the most. But there's a real temptation, once there's this pool of data that seems so perfect and easy and, well, clear, even if it's not, to start to use that to make decisions that can then cause problems for the actual effectiveness on the ground.
I see. Yeah, that's a really interesting point, so I appreciate that. We'll certainly want to make sure that that's interrogated as we think about whether or not we go forward with that aspect of it.
But to your point, I do think NGOs, in terms of creating software that helps them to monitor and evaluate, NGOs do need that, would like that, but would want not only themselves to be part of the design, but would want their beneficiaries to be part of the design, and it would be program specific, I would guess. So they're moving in the direction, research is moving in the direction to say beneficiaries have to be co-designers, not just in what services they receive, but in defining the problem and defining the solution, and therefore defining what matters and what doesn't matter. And when UN or anybody comes in and says, oh, well, we're going to define it this way, then it gets it causes those kinds of problems.
Yeah, I think that I mean, that's not so different from any technology project ever, because in the sense that if you don't have your stakeholders co-designing, its likelihood of failing is going to be significantly higher. I think it's just in this case it's much more complicated because of the accessibility of the beneficiaries, but it's no less important.
Mm-hmm. Great. So have you talked to any NGOs who are using your tool?
No, so that is the thing that we're trying to organize right now. So UNHCR is trying to organize a panel of service providers, and we're going to do a session that I would either fly out there for or I would join remotely. My preference will certainly be to go there, and so that's what I'm hoping is going to happen, and I'm just waiting to hear on potential dates and so on for that.
So I just want to do a time check. It's 11:01 by the clock on my computer. Does anybody have any hard stops?
I do, actually.
Yeah, and Darius and I do as well, unfortunately.
So, Renee, the only other thing I would tell you is I am good friends with the CARE country director in Jordan, the incoming one. And
Okay.
so she's just arriving there, and it'll take her a while to get settled. But, you know, if I can start to try to connect with her to find out who in CARE is updating this, and maybe connect you to that person.
Yeah, that would be phenomenal, because I mean, right now we're sort of reliant on Edouard, who has, as you can imagine, a lot of other priorities, and so anybody that we can have direct conversations with about this will make a big difference. So I would really appreciate that.
Sure, and I think in general, CARE is a hard sell. Most NGOs are skeptical of technology, but they, very general, it's obviously the person you talk to, but in my experience, they've been more on top of how technology can cause them more problems than help, and so they have, from my limited perspective of where I've seen them on the ground, I haven't worked for them, that they've been in tune to that. In fact, which is one of the reasons I like working with them more, because sometimes technology can cause more problems than help. So just to keep that in mind, there'll probably be someone. If you convince them, you've probably convinced most, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, well, no, that's great. I mean, I think it'll be really useful to kind of get that perspective, and just benefit from whatever realities and experiences that they have in using something like this. So I very much appreciate that. Thank you so much, Robin.
Sure. Well, and I want to make clear that I'm not saying that CARE doesn't use technology. They're just super cautious about it. It's got to work for them.
Yeah, absolutely. No. I mean, I certainly understand the need to, and the benefit of being cautious about this, and making sure that it's carefully executed and sort of designed. So so I appreciate that. Yeah.
So, Robin, I feel like there's more of this conversation. Would you be available again in 2 weeks?
Yeah, I can talk to you guys again. I'd like to hear from Renee. I'm not really sure how helpful I'm being. We could talk more detail if you wanted to talk about approaches and things like that. But in general, it seems to me that you're valuing, you're being careful to value what's important, and some of the maybe gaps of stakeholder perspectives you've already tuned into, and so I guess any of that would be just to kind of approach that up front versus at the tail end, because you want to win their trust, and anybody who's involved in co-design is going to be invested to help you succeed versus be skeptical. But I don't know. Was this helpful?
So I can I'll let Renee answer that, and then I'll say what I was going to say.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's too late for us to do that within the context in Jordan right now, but I think that there's an opportunity for us to do that in our second use case. if in Lebanon, like what we can do is perhaps show them what's been designed for Jordan, and then say, okay, well, this is a starting place. How could we better design this to kind of take into account sorry, I got distracted. Somebody's calling me from the government in Ottawa right now. Sorry. How can we design this in a way that just sort of takes into account this feedback up front rather than sort of, at the end? So, I mean, I think that, again, I think that it's a bit of a paradoxical situation, because on the one hand, I think that it's very difficult to develop technology projects without some sort of a beta on which you can give feedback, and so that's how we're viewing this, as a beta,
Right.
And people can, we recognize that there's lots of things that don't work as well as they can, including the user experience of the app. So how, this is a starting place, and we kind of almost see this in a way as a place where people can intervene and help us to make it better. So
And who's introducing the app? Like I said, there's a lot of skepticism around technology, so you're having the right relationships and knowing who on the ground, who they trust, and making sure you've gotten their trust, or you're coming through that channel they trust, is really important too.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No. That certainly that certainly resonates to me. Yeah. So that's yeah. I mean, I'm going to be. I really. I mean, the problem is that we have very little information around what users look like, and so we do recognize the limitations on that. I mean, we did this. This project, just for your reference, probably. It was done entirely pro bono. If it had been paid for by a normal contractor, it would have cost somewhere in the vicinity of $25,000, probably more. And so, since we're talking about a project that happened with zero money, things like the luxury of traveling to kind of locations and to do sort of in-depth M&E is a luxury we simply can't afford at the moment. But we also recognize that for it to be practically useful in a broader set of contexts going forward, and even within this particular context, we need to start doing a better job at incorporating that information in those voices. So I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to.
No, I'm with you. Sounds.
Yeah. So. So I mean, sorry.
Sounds like you're in tune.
Yeah, I like to think so, but I find it very helpful to hear your perspective. The perspective of the experience you've had. So I really appreciate that. And Alicia, what I would say is actually I don't think that the next meeting is the right one to have Robin in. I think it would probably be maybe the second, or like maybe 1 or 2 out from now.
Okay.
Had a little bit more time to, first of all, get our one-pager ready to get in front of audiences, and so on. So that would be my only feedback there.
And are you gonna start your next use case through the UN again, or who are you gonna start with?
Yeah, well, so the idea that we talked about with Edouard, who is our contact at UNHCR in Jordan, is trying to go to the case in Lebanon. And that would also be through UNHCR.
Okay.
So he was supposed to
recognize that when you get to Lebanon, you do introduce a lot more security issues.
Yes, sure.
It's not. I mean, so you just think, not just like there's people who don't want NGOs in Lebanon, so they could use that information negatively, But
right.
Yeah. So not to say that it shouldn't be done, there shouldn't be a place to access information, but that you may want to talk through those issues with the NGOs about what will actually be helpful to them and won't cause too much risk.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful. So I think that Yeah, I don't know how. I have very little sense for how far out that conversation is at this point in time. We are entirely at the whim of Edouard, and without him or another use case, it doesn't really make sense for us to kind of go too much further with it. So, for me, we're sort of moving forward on two fronts. One is we are trying to push forward with him. And second of all, we are trying to put together this one pager so that we can get it out to other coordinating bodies who might be interested. So, so those, for me, that's the strategy right now, is figuring out how to get this out in front of more people for whom there's a perceived value for something like this.
Cool. Well, I think it's a great work and it has a lot of potential, and I'm so excited that you're doing it. So if I can help, let me know, and I'll just wait to hear from you guys.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Robin.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you, Robin, and I look forward to seeing you guys again in 2 weeks. And Robin, I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks, Leisha. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Renee and Darius.
Bye.
Bye.